Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to this video series on rigging in Blender. Uh, Rigging a 3D character in Blender. In this case, the character is Judy Hopps from Zootopia. And when last I left you, I'm trying to remember what exactly we did. I know we made um, an arm chain along with some finger bones and a hand bone. And I think that was about it. I think we also made the head bone and the neck bone. Um, so yeah, so didn't get a whole lot done. It was a short video, but today the video is going to be a little bit longer because we're going to make some more deformation bones for the ears, the elbows, the knees. We're going to make a couple for the buttocks, and we're also going to be making IK and FK chains for the arm, and possibly the leg too. The leg we might save for another video. Um, and we're going to make a switch so that the mechanism bones can switch between the FK and the IK chain. So there we'll be able to divert control from one chain to the other. And with that said, let's just jump right into it. So I'm going to go ahead and go into front view right here. I'm going to select my chain and go into edit mode. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the head bone and bring it up here. And position it as such for the ear. I'm just going to bring this back. And I'm going to hitting Control R on the keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and roll the bone so that this is more in line with the ear. I'm going to select the head, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on the wireframe so we can see how this is lining up a little bit better. And yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my axis so we see where it's pointing. Alright. Now I'm going to subdivide this at least two times. And in the last video, I was trying to figure out how I can move joints evenly up and down the chain, and I couldn't figure out if there was like a shortcut for it or not. But I did remember there is a trick for how you can do it. That's so stupidly simple. I can't believe I didn't remember it when I was trying to figure this out. So if you select the first joint in your bone chain and then hit Shift S and do cursor to selected, then if you set your pivot point to the 3D cursor, you can select then the other joints in your chain, and using scale you can line them up. You can move them up and down the chain as such. And I'm just going to line mine up so that they match, so that this joint is in line with this edge loop and this joint is in line with this edge loop. It's already pretty close to begin with. And now I'm going to go ahead and set my pivot point back to median and just put my cursor to the center. Alright, I'm going to line these up a little bit better. And okay. Alright, that should work. Let's go ahead and, first things first, let's go ahead and take this bone and parent it to the head. Make sure keep offset is, you select keep offset. And let's go ahead and just rename these. So these are going to be deformation bones, so that first part doesn't need to change. And we're just going to call this ear. And call that A. Go ahead and copy that name and just paste and rename the rest of the bones in the chain. Oops. And you can give them whatever naming convention you want. I like the ABC method for chains of bones that have the same control like the same body part. So that's what we're going to do there. Oh, and I almost forgot. Make sure there is a .l at the end of these names. You can put you can also put like you can also put L dot whatever your name is at the beginning, and that will work too when you do the switch over. But I like doing the .l at the end because I like having them when we do the vertex groups. I like having them side by side with each other, because that just makes it easier to make edits when you're doing weight painting and stuff. Okay, so now that that chain is created, let's go ahead and do our usual trick. So set your pivot point back to the 3D cursor. The 3D cursor is already centered, but just go ahead and select cursor to center just to be on the safe side. You can also hit Shift C. Should do the same thing. Duplicate these bones with Shift D. Scale on the X -1. Scale on the X -1. And my numpad is turned off. Scale X -1. There we go. Okay. Go ahead and flip the names, and now these should be .r. So E, F, E, A, B, and C. Alright. Perfect. Moving along. Let's go and make our elbows, butt bones, and knee bones now. And the this bone is actually going to be very simple. You're just going to select this joint right here, hit E, and then Y, and just pull it out right there. Go ahead and remove the parent. Clear the parent for right now. Because I'm not sure yet if I want it to be parented to the mechanism bone or if I want it to be parented to the deformation bones. I'm not sure. We will find out, but rename that DEF elbow .L. And this is interesting. So because I've got X mirror turned on right now, if we go into options, I've got X axis mirror. You can see that bones that have like the same name, the same naming convention, so you know, MCH thigh underscore 1.R and MCH thigh underscore 1.L. Because those both have the same name, with the exception of the .L and the .R, moving one bone, if they're both in the exact same location on the opposite end of each other, moving one bone will the other bone will mirror those movements along the y-axis right here, which is, and the x-axis, which is really cool. Really makes things a lot easier. So you can see, even just by extruding, we extruded out this bone right here. So go ahead and select this name right here, and go ahead. Well, let me just show you real quick, because these don't share the same name right now. I can move this bone around and nothing happens. But if I go ahead and paste that in, make that a .R. Now if I select this, now they're moving to in sync with each other. So let's do the same thing for the knee. Let's go ahead and extrude along the Y and bring that out forward. Let's rename that. It's .L. Let's rename that knee. And that's going to be a deformation bone. Copy that name. Paste it in here. Make that a .R. And those are moving. And now let's do the same thing for these bones right here, which are going to be the butt bones. Extrude along the Y. And let's see here. I think I actually want these to be a little more centered. You know what? We can always move it later if it's going to be too much of an issue. So we'll just keep it in line with the thigh right now. Let's go ahead and rename that. That's going to be DEF buttocks.L. Go ahead and copy that name, paste it over here, make that .R. And is that how you spell buttocks? Nope. I knew it. I knew it. Gosh, I can't spell for nothing. Alright. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it glutes or whatever. But yeah, that is that. Okay. And of course, make sure these are all on the same layer. So just with all those selected, just go ahead and hit this button right here, and now they should all be, yep, with the rest of the deformation bones. So we are doing pretty well. Alright, turning on X-ray. Okay. So now, let's see what we're doing for time. Got 15 minutes left. And that should be enough time to do what the next thing I want to show you. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a FK and IK chain for our mechanism bones in the legs and the arms. And these chains are basically going to be parents of the mechanism bone. So think of, like, you know, one chain is the mom, one chain is the dad. And we're going to switch the control of the mechanism bones by these two chains using a driver, using some bone constraints and some drivers. So I'm just going to go over and I'm going to show you what I mean by going to this other Blender file that I have open. So right here I've just got like a demo of what I'm talking about. I've got the mechanism bones in the center right here, and I've got up top I've got an FK chain, and right here I've got an IK chain. And on the IK chain target, which is this bone right here, I have a custom property called IK FK switch. And now right now it's set to 1, which means the IK chain is in control. So if I go ahead and move that around, you can see the mechanism bones, which have copy rotation constraints applied to them for both the FK and the IK chain. The IK, right now they're following the IK chain. But if I switch this, well, let me position this right here, and then let me position this right here. But if I go here and I drag this down to 0, now the FK chain is in full control. This is a really handy tool for when you're doing different animation. So like for walk cycles, it's much more handy to have the arms controlled by an FK system than an IK system, but it's better to have the legs controlled with an IK system. And then there are certain situations where you'd want to do like the exact opposite, where the legs are controlled via an FK system and the arms controlled via an IK system. I typically will just go full IK for most of my animations. I rarely ever use the FK option, but it's good to have the option there just in case if you run into a situation where it'll just make your life easier. By the way, FK stands for forward kinematics and IK stands for inverse kinematics. And the short definition for what those mean is, for FK, you're moving up the chain. It's a forward system of motion. Whereas with inverse kinematics, you're working in the opposite direction. So right now, so this bone is controlling the arm. Alright, so I'm going to go to a new layer here, and I'm going to show you exactly how this is done. I'm going to go into here to mesh, or go to hit Shift A to add, and I'm going to go ahead and add a single bone. So this is a new armature. We don't have to worry about the name of the armature right now. You know, for this file, this is just a junk. This is just a junk file, a demo file, if you will. I'm going to go ahead and grab this joint and snap it to the grid to about here. I'm going to go ahead and extrude out and make another bone. And just I'm going to go ahead and rename these because we're just doing a single chain. We don't have to worry about the .L or .R or anything. So these are just MCH1 and MCH2. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and duplicate that and bring it up to right about there. And change these to FK. and this is going to be IK. Alright, and now we need one more bone, which is going to be the IK target. And go ahead and clear the parent. And the next thing you want to do for the IK chain is you want to select this joint right here, and you just want to drag it just a little bit in this direction. Because otherwise, if it's perfectly straight, you're going to run into some issues when trying to animate. We can also add in a pole target, and I'll show you what that does too. And so let's go ahead and sort of rename these. So this is going to be the IK target, and this is going to be the IK pole target. Alright. Alright, and let's just go ahead and add in the constraints for these chains. So the best way is to do that is to go into pose mode, and it brings up this extra option right here, this bone constraints option, and we can go ahead and add them in using the menu. But another way to do it is just to hold Control-Shift-C, and it brings up this menu. And for this first one, I'm going to add in inverse kinematics, and you can see it automatically adds a pull target. So if we select this bone first and then select this bone, if we hit select Control-Shift-C and do inverse kinematics, we can see it's set up the IK bone as our target. Alright, and we can see we're already getting some pretty interesting results with that. Make sure your chain length is set to 2, because there's 2 bones in this chain. Next thing is we want to select our pull target. That's right there. And now you can see it moved a bit. You can see it jumped up, and I'm not exactly sure why it does that, but it's an easy fix. So if you go over here to pole angle and you just select that, we can see that it needs to go in this direction. Another way we can tell is if we go in and turn on our axis again. Because these were all made from the same chain, all their axes should be in the same spot, and we can see that some of the axes are different. So make sure your axes are all conforming to the same bone. And I'm just going to go ahead and use this one by hitting Control-N and making sure that, yep, they're all aligned to the active bone. Very good. Okay, anyway, back into pose mode. So we can see this is upside down. It needs to be, these axes are upside down. They need to be up top with the X facing this way and the Z facing that way. So just play around with this until you get it to where it needs to go, and right now it's at -180 degrees. So that should work just fine, and it does. And now we can control our elbow, and we can control our whole arm chain using these 2 bones. Alright. Alright, now we need to set up the parenting system for, or the constraint system rather, for our mechanism bones. So go ahead and select this bone up here in our FK chain. Select this bone next, hit Control-Shift-C, and for the actual chain in the Judy Hopps model, we're going to do copy transform constraints, but for the purposes of this demo right here, we're going to make, and just to make it easier on ourselves, we're going to do copy rotation, just so you can have a visual example of how this is working. Alright, and it, up here, so it added the copy rotation constraint up here in the menu, so go ahead and change that to FK. Or you can give it, name it, and whatever you want. Just make sure you recognize the naming convention. Alright, and make sure you do the FK chain first, because the next one is going to be the IK, obviously, and we want our IK chain, our IK constraints rather, to be the first on the list of this constraint, of these constraints, because the order does matter. The order of your modifiers, your constraints, it does matter, and we do want the IK to be first on this list right here. First is the one that's on the bottom. Okay. Alright, so now that that's done, now you can see how this is working. Because the IK is the first on the list, the mechanism bones are reading this constraint first, and so our IK has full control. If we move our FK chain, even though the influence is at 100% as well, it's not having any effect on it because it's reading the IK constraint first. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some drivers to these constraints that are going to be controlled by a property that we're going to place on this bone. And those bones are, I can't talk right now, I'm sorry. And basically what's going to happen is when this is at 1, when that property is at 1, the influence for our IK is going to be at 100%, and the influence for our FK is going to be at 0. And then when the when the property is at 0, this is going to be at 1, and this is going to be at 0. So, and I'm going to show you how we're going to do that right now. So select everything, do Alt-R and Alt-G to reset everything. So we're going to start here with the forearm. I'm going to right-click on here and add driver, and this is another change. I do not know what single from target does, but manually create later is what the one you want to select, and just do that on both of them. Same thing over here. You can also, no, I guess you can't. Never mind. Thought you could just repeat the action just by hovering over it and hitting Shift R. Alright. Next thing is I'm going to go ahead and go to this bone right here. Go to the bone, the single bone tab right here, the one that's just a bone by itself, and go all the way down here and add in a custom property. And right now the property is set at 1. Go ahead and hit Edit, and I want this to be 0 by default, so just it's important that you have 0.0. And I'm going to just call this property switch and make that a lowercase. Or you can call it IK slash FK, or rather FK slash IK switch. Alright, and that should be everything you need to do. So hit OK. So now we've got this property that we can move back and forth, like so. Um, you can also, if you here, let me show you what happens when you take this 0 away. If you take that 0 away and just leave it at regular plain 0, then there's no gradual change. It's just it's either 0 or 1. There's no in between. So it's pretty much like binary, and that might make it a little bit easier for animating. My personal preference is just having that at 0.0 and just having that option to, you know, have some kind of gradient in between. Anyway, alright, so now we've got our property, our custom property set for this bone right here. Now, what we want to do is start editing our drivers. So go over here and we'll start with the forearm. Select the forearm, and and let me show you how to get to that menu. So if you open up, if you drag out a second window and you want to go to the graph editor, and it's F curve by default right down here. I don't know if you can see that because my camera might be in the way. Yeah, you can see it. So go ahead and select that and switch that to drivers. Alright. Make sure your properties window is open, and make sure you're on the drivers tab. They've made a lot of changes to Blender since the last update. I'm not sure how I feel about it. Alright. So, select this bone and hover over here, right click, and go down to copy data path. Alright. Now, over here we can see our drivers, and because we name them, we can tell which driver is which. So we've got our IK right there, and we've got our FK. Let me just make sure that is the right order. Yep, okay. So go ahead and click on the FK first. Now, what this data path is, if you go over here to your drivers tab, and right here, if you select single property, change the name to switch. It can be whatever you want it to be, but I like switch. Go ahead and select, you know, your armature, and okay. So what this essentially means is switch is equal to the value of whatever this property is. So if it's currently at 0, then the value is at 0. Then switch is equal to 0. If it's at 1, then switch is 1. Now we're going to do a scripted expression here for each of these constraints, each of these drivers, that's going to change the influence of these constraints. I've already said that, but I want to go over it again just so you can, you know, follow along with me and understand this, because believe me, you know, this stuff took me a while to figure out, and it can be confusing as hell. So right now, let me go ahead and set this back to 0. So right now the value is 0, and we're on the IK driver, the driver for the IK constraint. So right here, up here, this tells you the type of driver it's going to be, and we're doing scripted expression. If we just type switch, you can see right here the influence went down to 0 because our property right here is 0. If we move if we move it to 0.24, we can see the influence is 0.24, and we can see how now the IK has very little influence. It still has some influence, but not as much as it regularly would. So we need to add a driver now to the FK that's going to do the, it's going to inverse the influence, that's going to reduce the influence on the FK. Now the equation for this is a little tricky. It took me a while to figure out, but here's essentially what it is. So go ahead and set this to single property, make this, you should still have your data path copied, so just go ahead and paste that in, and go ahead and rename this to switch. Now that's switch, and now that is 0 as well. So what we need here is this, and this is all Python, by the way. So what we need here is an equation that is essentially when our property is at 1, this will be at 0. And when our property is at 0, this will be at 1. So remember, switch is equal to whatever the property value is of this bone. So the equation that's going to help us out there is going to be this. So at the beginning of switch, type in a minus sign. Then you want to subtract -1 from whatever that value is going to be. And go ahead and hit enter. So now you see what just happened. The influence jumped to 1. And now let me explain. So right now our property is at 0. You know what? Let me go ahead and just quickly add this to this as well. So which one am I on? Let's do IK. Alright, so that's just switch, make sure this is single property, armature, data path, boom, error, show the, oh, okay, I don't know. Single property, switch, and -1. Okay. So now it should work. So now our IK chain is doing nothing because it's at 0. But our FK chain is in full effect. And you can see that represented right here. But if we go to set this to 1, now our IK chain is in full control and our FK influence is at 0. Now I'm going to explain how this is working. So let me go ahead and set this back to 0. And just to give you an example, we actually set it to like 0.46 or something, just so you can see. Yeah, so you can see this is at 0.54, this is at 0.46. Both those added together equals 1. Alright, but enough dawdling. Let's set this back to 0. So right now, if we look at switch right here, what is switch? Switch is 0 right now. That negative number in front of switch means essentially nothing. A negative modifier in front of a 0, it's still going to be 0. There is no such thing as -0. So the negative modifier is for all intents and purposes is moot right now. So basically what you have here is 0 minus -1, which essentially is just 1. You're adding 1 when you're subtracting -1. So that's how that's working. That's how this is equal to 1. But if we set this back to 1, we're adding, we have -1 minus -1, you're adding 1. That's now this expression is 0. That's why the influence is 0. So that's how that works. It's a stupidly simple equation, but it took me forever to figure that out. How to get it to how to find that balance between the two constraints. Now you could supposedly you don't even really have to worry about adding a driver to this FK constraint at all, because the IK driver is in front and the mechanism bones are reading that one first. You can essentially just keep this at 1 the whole time and just allow the IK switch to do all the work. I like this method more because I like knowing for sure that this is at 0 and this is at 1, and I like having that sort of I like having this balance where I can get different results with how much these bones are being influenced. You know, you can do a lot of cool stuff with that with that system. So alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pause the recorder, and when I come back we will have a chain of bones right here that will essentially be controlling the mechanism bones, and I'll show you something a little bit extra that I did as well when we get back. Anyway, let me. Okay, we're back, and I went ahead and made the changes to the current mesh. So, as you can see, I have my FK bones all set up, and my as well as my IK bones all set up. And when I go ahead and move my IK bones, because my custom property is set at 1 right now, the mechanism bones are following perfectly the IK bones, or at least they should. And there is something going on here. Let me just check that. Oh no, the influence should be, yep, the influence is working. Probably because this is local space. If I set that to world space, yeah, now it's working. But I'll set those all to world space when I combine these. But there we go. And when I go ahead and just rotate these a little bit, go back to my property right here and turn that down to 0, we now see it following the FK chain. Alright, so now what I will do is just go ahead and 0 all those out. Alright, so that's going to do it for this video. What I'm going to do now, just so I don't bore you anymore with just busy work, is I'm gonna, for everything I did over here, I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing over here. On these constraints, you can see right now they're set to local space. That's just so I could have them in their current position, so I can show off, that this is working. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back. I'm going to essentially go into edit mode. And I'm just going to go ahead and make sure my snapping is set to vertex, and I'm going to go ahead and snap these in place to these chains, right? So that they're so that they're aligned with one another. I'm going to do that. And I'm also going to set all of the, after I do that, I'm going to set all of these constraints to world space. So that's going to be, so I'm going to do that for before the next video, I'm also going to make IK, FK chains for the legs here. And I don't need to show that on film because it's basically, I'm just going to be basically doing the same thing I did for the arm right here. I'm just going to do the exact same thing to the leg. So everything I did for the arms, what I showed you in that on that dummy file, on that demo file, I'm going to do the exact same thing for the legs. I'll do like a brief overview of, in the next video I'll do a brief overview of all that stuff just so you guys aren't lost, and and just so I'm not lost either. And what we will also do in that video is we will make we'll add a few other bones that we're going to need, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create a foot roll system for the feet when they are in IK mode. And when they are not in IK mode, we're going to make separate joints that are going to be able to control them individually. Those different, the different bones there. So that's going to all be in the next video. Excuse me. But that's going to do it for this one right here. Guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, comment, let me know what you think of these videos. Let me know if you have any suggestions yourselves for rigging or anything like that. If you have any opinions over the stuff I just showed you. I'm always anxious to hear new ideas when it comes to this subject matter. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Until next time, peace.